The waves of the Bosphorus move slowly, like they are sleepy too, brushing the stone walls and sliding back into the dark water. Lamps burn in small windows. A dog barks once, then thinks again and decides it is too tired for a second bark. The wind passes through narrow streets, touching old doors and worn steps that have seen more feet than anyone can count. Above everything, domes and towers rest against the night sky, as if the whole city has taken a long, deep breath. This is Constantinople, a city between two worlds, not just on the map, but in spirit. Europe on one side, Asia on the other. A bridge, a gate, a promise, and a memory all in one. People used to say that if the world was a great book, Constantinople was one of the best chapters. Even the night seems to know it is walking through history here, stepping softly so it does not wake the stones. For more than 1,000 years, this place stood strong. Empires rose, argued, bragged, collapsed, disappeared. And yet Constantinople remained, like that one old relative at family gatherings who has seen everything and just smiles quietly, because nothing surprises them anymore. The Romans called it their new Rome, others called it the Queen of Cities. Today, in this story, we simply watch it sleep. Imagine the harbor at night. Ships rest gently, ropes creaking and wood whispering against wood. Sailors talk in low voices, half in prayer, half in gossip. Somewhere, someone is cooking fish that is probably slightly overcooked, but nobody wants to complain. Not tonight. The smell of salt, smoke, and distant bakeries hangs in the cool air. Cats own the streets, as usual. They walk like tiny emperors who pay no taxes and follow no rules. The city glows softly in the moonlight. Marble columns catch the silver light. Churches rise with wide domes like calm umbrellas against the stars. The great Hagia Sophia stands silent, as if it carries every prayer spoken under its roof. When the wind moves, it almost feels like the building sighs. After all, it has seen centuries of hope and fear, weddings and funerals, arguments about God, and arguments about pretty much everything else. Humans are very good at arguing. History proves that. But tonight we are not here for noise. Tonight, we walk slowly. We remember that this city is old. Not just my back hurts old. Not I need a nap old. Ancient. It has been Roman, then Byzantine, then simply itself. It has seen emperors with shiny crowns, generals with big plans, monks with quiet eyes, and traders counting coins like they were poetry. It has heard Latin, Greek, Turkish, Italian, Arabic, and 100 other languages mixing in its markets. If walls could speak, these ones would never stop. Yet, as we look closer, we notice something else. The streets are not as crowded as they once were. Many houses are empty. Some windows are broken. Weeds grow between stones carved by hands long gone. Once, this city held hundreds of thousands of people. Now, much fewer remain. You can almost feel the echo of the past walking beside the present. You see cracks in marble, but also candles in windows. You see sadness, but also stubborn life. Humans are very good at that too. This city is not just famous for its beauty, it is famous because it survived again and again. Armies came like waves. They said, this will be easy. It was not. The walls said, try harder. For centuries, attackers broke like glass against those great defenses. Constantinople was the city that would not fall. At least, not yet. And so it stands at the edge of two worlds in another way, between yesterday and tomorrow. Something is coming. Everyone feels it, even if they don't say it out loud. The night is calm, but not empty. It feels like that quiet moment before a storm, or before a big exam you forgot to study for, but in a historical, dramatic, slightly less funny way. But don't worry. We are not rushing forward. This is not a story of loud shouting and flashing swords. It is the quiet story. The slow story. The human story. A story told like a soft lullaby wrapped inside memory. Somewhere inside the city, a small boy listens to stories from his grandmother. She tells him of heroes, saints, and miracles, of angels that once guarded the walls. He listens, eyes wide, then slowly nods off, half believing that the city itself is alive and watching over him. And in a way, she is not wrong. Every city is alive as long as people dream inside it. Across the water, lights flicker in distant camps. Somewhere far away, decisions are being made that will shape the fate of this place. But right now, in this first chapter, we don't need names, battles, or cannons yet. We only need to feel the city as it is. Proud, tired, beautiful, and carrying 1,000 years on its back like a king who has walked too long in his crown and would really like a chair. Look at the great gates, closed for the night. Look at the long, mighty walls stretching into the dark. They once stopped the strongest armies in the world. Tonight, they simply stand there, listening to waves and wind. Even stone gets tired. Even legends need rest. If you walk through the marketplace, you find stalls covered for the evening. Pigeons sleep on roofs. A baker finishes tomorrow's dough. A scholar bends over a candle, still copying an old book, saving words from being lost to time. He yawns. He scratches his beard. He promises himself only one more page, and then does 5 more. Knowledge has always had night workers like him. Far above, the sky is wide and endless. Stars watch the city like quiet witnesses. They have seen it all before. Rises, falls, hopes, endings, and new beginnings disguised as losses. History is not just noise and fire. Often it is gentle. Often it is slow. Often it is like this moment. A pause, a breath, a soft whisper before change. Constantinople does not yet know the exact shape of the dawn that is coming. Or maybe it does. In the deep way ancient cities know things without speaking. Maybe the stones feel it. Maybe the sea feels it. Maybe that sleepy dog feels it too, but doesn't he care as long as breakfast is on time? For now, we simply sit beside this city at night. We listen. We watch lights blink out one by one. We feel the weight of its long story, full of glory and mistakes, triumphs and tears. A city between continents, between empires, between past and future, between staying and letting go. This is where our story begins. Not with explosions, but with silence, with the city resting, unaware, or perhaps completely aware, that its long chapter is reaching its last few pages, and that tomorrow, the world will change, and so will its name. But tonight, it is still Constantinople, wrapped in moonlight, breathing softly with the sea. The story of Constantinople is not a short story. It is not a quick text message of history. It is a 1,000-year audiobook, and someone forgot the skip button. To understand its last days, we need to remember how long it had already lived, and how many times the world had looked at it and said, "Wow, still standing." Long before this quiet night, the city had another name and another personality. It was the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire, the part of Rome that did not collapse when the western half decided to take a permanent nap, while Rome in the west fell to invaders, fires, and a long list of problems. Constantinople stayed like a stubborn candle that refused to go out, even when the wind tried its best. Imagine the map of the world back then. Kingdoms appear, disappear, change shape, argue over borders, change their flags, sometimes forget their flags, and yet this city remains in the same place, like it glued itself to the earth and said, "Nope, I live here." It survived sieges that would have erased other cities. Enemies arrived with ladders, towers, plans, speeches, sometimes even motivational speeches. And the city simply said, "Nice try," and kept going. For many people in medieval Europe and the Middle East, Constantinople felt immortal, like it had a secret deal with time. And in a way, it did. It had strong walls, yes, but more than that, it had spirit. It had trade routes bringing silks from the east and silver from the west. It had scholars who saved books while the rest of the world lost them. It had priests, generals, sailors, merchants, and, of course, cats supervising everything with serious faces. The people believed they were not just any city. They were the city, the last light of Rome. When someone said the empire, many meant this place. Marble palaces lined wide avenues. Markets were loud and colorful. Spices, gems, fabrics, rumors, and jokes all traveled through this city like birds that refused to stay quiet. For centuries, Constantinople acted like a bridge between worlds. Christians and Muslims, East and West, all ideas, and new ones all, passed through its gates. Sometimes peacefully, sometimes less peacefully. History loves drama. That part is not new, but time has a sense of humor, and not always a nice one. Empires age the same way people do. First, they feel strong, then tired, then they pretend they are not tired. Then one day they realize that pretending takes even more energy than being strong. Constantinople was no different. By the 15th century, the great empire had shrunk like a sweater, washed in very hot water. From vast lands, it had become mostly itself. One shining city, surrounded by memories of what once was. Yet the pride remained, and so did the habit of survival. Think of all it had already faced before the final siege even began. Revolts, plagues, crusaders who sometimes came to help and then forgot what helping meant. Earthquakes shaking its stones, fires running through districts like wild wind. Each time, the city said, "Okay, that was rude," and kept living. People born there grew up with legends. They heard that angels guarded the walls. They heard that God had chosen their city. They heard that, as long as Constantinople stood, the world still had one last anchor of Rome. This belief wrapped around the people like a blanket, warm and a bit worn out, but still comforting. But here is the quiet truth, the honest one we whisper at night. The fall of Constantinople did not start with cannons. It started with time. Trade changed. New routes were found. Riches moved elsewhere. Armies grew larger and used new weapons. The world upgraded, and the city could not always update its software. Money became scarce. Some sections of the city emptied. Marble cracked. Roofs sagged. Still beautiful, yes. Still proud, yes. But the glow was softer now, like an old lamp that remembers when it shone brighter. And yet, here is the amazing part. Even tired, it survived. Even with fewer people and broken walls, it continued to exist. Teach, sing, pray, and live. Old men told stories in tea shops. Children played in courtyards. Fishermen argued about the size of fish that totally got away. Life, stubborn and simple, went on. From faraway lands, travelers wrote about Constantinople with awe. They saw giant domes floating over the skyline. They saw the sea glittering around the city like silver armor. They walked through huge gates and thought, this is a place built for legends, not regular humans like me who forget where they left their shoes. The city's identity was heavy, like wearing a crown every day, even when you read just trying to buy bread. To live in Constantinople was to feel history pressing gently on your shoulders, whispering, behave. Emperors walked here. But underneath the glory was uncertainty. People sensed that the world was changing around them faster than they could hold it still. The old empire was like a long song reaching its final verse. You can stretch music, but you cannot stop it from ending. So when we talk about the fall, we must first see the long life. A life full of light, noise, faith, mistakes, art, and strength. A life where countless generations lived and died, believing that their city was chosen, and for a long time, it truly seemed that way. Tonight, as the city rests, this whole past rests with it. Not gone, just quiet. Every stone, every street, every old wall carries stories within it, like folded letters nobody threw away. If you could lift the city like a book and shake it, 1,000 years would fall out in tiny pieces. Laughter, tears, crowns, coins, prayers, battles, songs, markets, and moments nobody remembers except the stones. Constantinople survived so much that people almost forgot it could ever fall at all. When something has always been there, our minds secretly decide it will always stay. We do this with cities, with empires, and sometimes with the people we love. History gently reminds us this is not how time works. But don't feel sad yet. This is not the end of the story, just another night in a long line of nights. For now, we simply honor how long this city stood, how often it refused to give up, how many storms it watched pass over the horizon while it remained standing. 1,000 years of survival is not noise, not fireworks, it is quiet strength. It is waking up again and again and again, even when tired. And as Constantinople sleeps tonight, wrapped in moonlight and memory, we know we are not just watching a fall, we are watching the closing of a very long chapter, written slowly across centuries, by millions of hands, in a city that refused to be ordinary. Far from the sleeping city, another figure is awake, not a tired fisherman. Not a guard on the walls, a young ruler, sitting with maps spread before him like a huge, complicated puzzle that he is absolutely determined to finish, even if a few pieces are missing or may be chewed by history. His name is Memde. History calls him Memda II. But right now, in this quiet moment, he is simply a young man with a very old dream. He is not the first to look at Constantinople and think, that would make a nice capital. Many before him tried. Many failed. The city had a long habit of saying no. But Mimda is different. He is young, yes, but not naive. He has that special mix of stubbornness and big vision that makes history either very interesting or very stressful for everyone else. Imagine him studying by lamplight. The room is quiet, except for the soft scritch of a pen, and maybe one annoyed servant thinking, "Does this man ever sleep?" Mehmed learned languages, history, science, strategy. He was not just swinging swords, he was also swinging ideas. He read about Alexander the Great. He read about Caesar. He read about kings who changed maps like they were rearranging furniture. And through it all, one thought returned again and again: Constantinople. The city in the middle, the jewel, the prize everyone talked about, the one story that felt unfinished. There was also a prophecy people whispered for centuries, that the city would fall and the conqueror would be blessed. You can imagine how that sounds to a determined young sultan. It is like history itself leaning in and saying, "Hey, what if it's you?" Was Mehmed perfect? No. He was human, brilliant, intense, stubborn, sometimes impatient, sometimes surprisingly patient, and completely sure that great things were waiting in front of him, not behind. He had already tasted power young, lost it once, then returned. That leaves marks. It makes a person sharper. It teaches them that big dreams don't always shake hands nicely. Sometimes they wrestle. The city in the middle. The jewel, the prize everyone talked about. The one story that felt unfinished. There was also a prophecy people whispered for centuries, that the city would fall and the conqueror would be blessed. You can imagine how that sounds to a determined young sultan. It is like history itself leaning in and saying, "Hey, what if it's you?" Was Mehmed perfect? No. He was human, brilliant, intense, stubborn, sometimes impatient, sometimes surprisingly patient, and completely sure that great things were waiting in front of him, not behind. He had already tasted power young, lost it once, then returned. That leaves marks. It makes a person sharper. It teaches them that big dreams don't always shake hands nicely. Sometimes they wrestle. Outside his palace walls, the Ottoman Empire was growing fast. Soldiers trained. Officials argued about taxes as officials do everywhere, in every century. Markets buzzed. Poets wrote verses. Blacksmiths hammered metal with steady rhythm. And through all of this life, one idea moved like a quiet river. The old city is still there. The Romans, the Byzantines, still hold Constantinople. For many Ottomans, that city, sitting right in the middle of their lands, was like a bookmark sticking out of a closed book, refusing to be ignored. Mehmed did not want to ignore it. He wanted to finish the chapter. But here is something important for our bedtime story. This is not a tale of a good guy versus bad guy cartoon. History is rarely that simple. Mehmed was not a villain in a black cape twirling his mustache. He was a leader of his time, seeing opportunity, seeing symbolism, seeing destiny wrapped into one city of marble and memories. He understood something powerful. Constantinople was not just walls and houses. It was meaning. Whoever owned it would say to the world, "This is the center now." And that kind of meaning can keep a person very awake at night. Mehmed walked outside sometimes, looking toward the distant horizon, toward the water, toward that city he had not yet taken but already carried in his mind. Stars stretched above him, calm and uncaring, as stars usually are. Maybe he smiled a little. Maybe he worried a little. Big dreams always come with both. He listened to advisors, of course. Some were excited. Some said, "Maybe don't." There were older men who had seen failures before and knew the city's reputation. They warned him about the walls, about the sea, about past armies who came home disappointed. Constantinople was the boss level of cities. Mehmed heard them. He simply refused to be scared away. He began to prepare not loudly, but carefully. Plans formed, piece by piece. He strengthened his army. He looked at new weapons, new ideas, new methods. He did not want to copy the past. He wanted to outgrow it. In his mind, the story was simple. History opens doors only for those brave or stubborn enough to knock loudly. Yet, even with all this power around him, remember, he was still young, younger than some of the cities he wanted to control. That's for sure. That mix of youth and destiny can be dangerous, but it can also be unstoppable. He wanted to be remembered, not as that one sultan from somewhere, but as the one who finished the great unfinished story. Sometimes, he must have wondered what the people inside Constantinople were doing that very night. Were they afraid? Were they calm? Did they even take him seriously? Humans on both sides of history often think the other side is either 10 feet tall or fast asleep. The truth is usually somewhere in the middle. They did not hate the city. In many ways, he admired it. He saw its beauty, its history, its position between worlds. He didn't just want to break it. He wanted to claim it, to fill it with new life, new sounds, new prayers, new roads. Where others saw their city, he saw our future. Perspective is everything. But make no mistake, admiration does not mean hesitation. He carried a clear dream in his heart, simple and solid. The city will be mine. Not said in rage, said like a quiet promise to himself. The way someone says, one day I'll climb that mountain, or one day I'll finish that very long TV series everyone keeps talking about. Except his mountain was made of stone walls and history books, and as the lamps burned lower, as the night stretched thin and soft around his palace, the young Sultan kept thinking, planning, imagining, routes, ships, soldiers' strategies, and the moment when the great gates would open. Not by magic, not by miracle, but by patience and power combined. Across the water, Constantinople slept, wrapped in its pride and its tiredness. It did not know exactly how soon the world would change. Or perhaps it did, in the quiet way ancient cities feel things. On one side, an old city with a long story. On the other side, a young ruler with an old dream. Between them, time, destiny, and a sea that had watched empires rise and fall, like waves coming and going across its surface. History was moving, but slowly, like a sleepy giant, stretching before standing up. And Mehmed, the young sultan, was already awake. While a young sultan dreams of taking a city, inside Constantinople another man carries the weight of keeping it. His name is Constantine, the 11th Paleologos. History remembers him as the last Byzantine emperor, the last one to wear the crown of a world that once stretched across seas and continents. But tonight, forget the statues. Forget the dramatic paintings. Picture a tired man standing on ancient stones, feeling the night breeze on his face, and silently thinking, wow, this is a lot. He was not a boy king. He was not naive. He knew very well what kind of situation he was in. Imagine becoming captain of a huge ship, just when the ship already has holes. The crew is small, the sails are patched, and the ocean is full of storms, and also the map is missing. That was basically his job description. Yet he accepted it, not because it was easy, but because somebody had to stand there. Constantine was not surrounded by endless wealth or giant armies. There was no magic button labeled extra soldiers, no cheat code, no save game to reload. What he did have was responsibility, the old, heavy kind that comes from knowing you are the ending sentence of a 1,000-year story. He walked the city often, not with trumpets or long parades, just quietly, through narrow streets, past broken houses and empty courtyards, along the great walls that had once stopped the world. Guards bowed, children stared, old women crossed themselves, and he nodded back with a small, tired smile, the universal smile of leaders thinking, yes, we will somehow manage, probably. At night, the emperor sometimes went up on the walls and looked outward. Dark water, distant fires from camps, the quiet breathing of the city behind him. He knew the Ottomans were growing stronger. He knew help from the west might come late, or not at all, or arrive with long speeches and short numbers of ships. He knew the prophecy stories, the rumors, the fear. He was not blind to any of it. And yet, he stayed. He was not rich in soldiers, but he was rich in stubborn courage. The kind that doesn't shout or pose dramatically with lightning behind it. The kind that simply says, all right, if this is my place in history, then I will stand my ground. Constantine did not spend his days sitting on a golden couch eating grapes. He worked. He negotiated with Venetians and Genoese. He begged for help from kings and popes. He encouraged his people, repaired walls, checked supplies, and tried not to think too much about math, like number of defenders versus number of attackers, because those numbers did not look friendly. Inside the palace, things were not glitter and luxury anymore. He was both emperor and neighbor. He prayed in the same churches, heard the same cannons in the distance, worried about the same storms on the horizon. He was not a legend walking above the ground. He was a human being, with tired eyes and unshakable resolve. He also had a certain calm humor, the kind people get when life has already thrown everything at them and they're still standing there like, all right, universe, what's next? You almost imagine him joking softly with soldiers on the walls. Not big jokes, just small ones to keep fear from growing too tall. The title he carried was beautiful and heavy. Basileus of the Romans. Emperor of the Romans. Not just a king of a city, but symbolically the last guardian of the Roman idea itself. He knew the weight of those words. He knew that if Constantinople fell, something ancient, something that had survived earthquakes, crusades, plagues, arguments, and the general chaos of humanity would finally reach its end. No pressure, right? Sometimes, late in the night, he must have thought about the old emperors before him, the ones who ruled vast lands, commanded great armies, dealt with problems that now seemed almost cute compared to his own. He was not jealous, just aware that history was not giving him the easy chapter. Yet his courage was quiet. He did not scream about destiny. He did not curse fate every 5 minutes. He simply prepared. He strengthened broken sections of the walls. He gathered anyone willing to fight. Greeks, Italians, foreigners, monks, sailors, all found themselves part of the last defense. Even people who did not always like each other very much, suddenly shared the same city, the same fear, and the same emperor. He prayed not for miracles to fall from the sky like dramatic movie scenes, but for strength, for clarity, for his people to be protected in whatever way the future would allow. In the great church of Hagia Sophia, he stood beneath the enormous dome and felt small, as everyone does, under that ceiling. It is difficult to feel like a big ruler when history itself is staring down at you from mosaics. And outside, life continued despite everything. Bakers baked bread. Merchants argued, children ran through alleys playing games. Cats held important secret meetings, as cats always do. The city lived, because that is what cities do, even with danger on the horizon. Constantine loved that life. He was not guarding just stones or walls or symbols. He was guarding people, real, ordinary lives. People with families and jokes, and worries about rent and bread and the weather. He knew very well that behind every strategy map were human hearts beating faster than usual. He was not perfect. No ruler is. He made mistakes, had doubts, got tired. But in this final chapter of his city's story, he showed a simple truth. Sometimes bravery is just staying when leaving would be easier. As he walked the walls again one evening, the sea dark and endless before him, the emperor probably felt both fear and peace. Fear because he knew what was coming. Peace because he also knew who he was when it arrived. The last emperor of Byzantium. The last man to sit on a throne that went back to Constantine the Great. A living ending. A human bookmark between one world and the next. Behind him, the city glowed softly with lamplight. Ahead of him the future waited. Not talking, not shouting, just standing there like a closed door that would soon open no matter what anyone wanted. He straightened his shoulders. He kept walking the walls. He kept planning. He kept hoping. His story was not loud, but it was steady. And sometimes, steady is more powerful than loud. Tonight, Constantine XI does not know exactly how his story will end, but he knows one thing for sure. When that end comes, he will meet it standing. Night came softly over Constantinople, the kind of night where shadows stretch long and every sound feels louder than it should be. On the walls, tired Byzantine guards leaned on spears, rubbing their eyes, pretending not to be scared. Below them, campfires from the Ottoman side glowed like a whole second city made of sparks. It was beautiful, if you ignored the part where almost everyone out there wanted to break down your walls the next morning. By now, both sides had settled into a strange rhythm. Siege life is basically the worst type of routine. You wake up, you repair damage, you worry, you fight, and then you go to sleep just to dream about worrying and fighting again. The city was still standing, but it felt like it was breathing a little heavier each day, like an old man climbing a staircase that never ends. Mehmed II, the young sultan, was not exactly the sit back and relax type. He walked through his camp like someone who had already decided the ending of the movie and was just annoyed that everyone else hadn't caught up yet. In his mind, Constantinople wasn't a question. It was a when. not an if. And honestly, that confidence is great for motivation. Slightly less great if you are on the other side of the wall. The people inside the city could feel the pressure. Markets were quieter. Bread was harder to find. Some people prayed more. Some complained more. Some did both, just in case. And all through the streets, kids ran where they still could, half understanding that something big was happening, half just annoyed that the adults were suddenly very stressed and weird about everything. Inside the palace, Emperor Constantine XI tried to look calm. That is kind of the main job of an emperor during a siege. Even when your brain is screaming inside like a kettle on a stove, your face has to say, everything is fine, totally normal, large hostile army outside, never heard of it. He met with generals, church leaders, and anyone who could still offer help. But the truth sat heavy in every room. There were not many soldiers left, not much money left, and not much time left. Meanwhile, on the Ottoman side, something else was happening. Mehmed had brought giant cannons, not just regular cannons. These were the overcompensating for something type of cannons. Massive bronze monsters that needed teams of animals just to move. When they fired, the ground shook, cups rattled, and pretty much everyone close by instantly reconsidered their life choices. The biggest among them, often called the Great Bombard, was like a dragon made of metal, breathing fire. Still, resistance didn't fade. If anything, the pressure shaped it like fire shapes metal. There were nobles, commoners, monks, foreign volunteers, Genoese, Venetians, others who had their own reasons to defend the city. Some fought for faith, some for trade, some because they had just arrived at the wrong time and now couldn't leave. Whatever the reason, they stood together on the walls, side by side, which is kind of poetic if you ignore the part where everyone is terrified. Every now and then, there were small clashes, little tests. Ottoman units would move closer. Arrows would fly, defenders would answer. Sometimes raids happened at night, shadows fighting shadows. Nothing fully decided the war. But every fight chipped away at strength, energy, and sometimes hope. And every name added to the list of dead made the city feel a little quieter. Supplies were another problem that didn't care about speeches. Food does not appear because you believe hard enough. Bread grew smaller. People shared more. Some went hungry so others could eat. Somewhere, a baker probably sighed deeply every morning, thinking, "This is the worst time in history to be in carbohydrates." Yet even hunger couldn't erase pride. Constantinople was not just a city, it was a symbol of empire, of faith, of a long story that started centuries before any of these people were alive. To lose it felt unthinkable. But history doesn't ask what feels unthinkable, it just keeps moving. At night, when the noise finally softened, the city felt almost peaceful, which was the most misleading kind of peace. Torches burned along the walls, the sea whispered against the shore. Somewhere, a dog barked, because dogs have excellent timing, and over everything stretched the sky, full of stars that had quietly watched empires rise and fall without ever blinking. Inside houses, families try to sleep. Sleep during a siege is strange. Your body is tired, your mind is loud. You lie there thinking about what ifs. What if the walls break? What if help doesn't come? What if tomorrow is the day everything changes? And then sometimes you doze off anyway, because even fear has limits, and the brain just goes, "Okay, I'm shutting down now." The soldiers, on night watch, didn't have that option. They leaned on spears, cloaks wrapped tight, eyes switching between shadows and the glowing Ottoman camp. They talked quietly to stay awake. About families, about food they missed, about warm baths, about how they were definitely going to complain about this in heaven if they got the chance. Humor again. You joke not because things are funny but because they aren't, and your brain needs some way to breathe. And then there was the sense, growing stronger each day, that something big was coming. You can't see the future, but sometimes you can feel it walking toward you. The cannons hit harder. The attacks probed deeper. Mimde pushed more boldly. The walls showed scars like tired skin. Everyone knew this long, slow pressure was building toward one sharp moment. It's like watching storm clouds pile up over the sea. You don't know the exact minute lightning will strike, but you know it's not here just to admire the view. Constantine, she prayed, planned and prepared. Mehmed the second planned, pushed, and waited for his moment. Between them stretched a battered city, a tightening ring of enemies, and a future about to be rewritten. So day after day, the bombard thundered. Each time it fired. Smoke curled into the sky, mingling with dust from crumbling stones. The air smelled of sulfur, sweat and fear, the classic perfume of siege warfare. People inside the city learned to move differently, listen differently, breathe differently. Even the animals sensed it. Cats disappeared. Dogs whined. Pigeons flew away in flocks. The city itself felt nervous. Through it all, Constantine XI stayed calm. He moved along the walls, nodding at soldiers, offering encouragement, making small jokes to lighten the unbearable tension. Humor was not absent in war. It was a tool, a small arrow of light in a very dark situation. Even when walls shook and dust fell, laughter helped someone hold on, helped someone aim an arrow more steadily, helped someone carry another stone onto a weakened parapet. The psychological effect of the bombard was enormous. It was not just about physical damage. It was about shaking confidence, tiring defenders, testing patience. Memnem knew this well. The cannon was his way of saying, "I can wait longer than you can." And the defenders, stubborn as ever, replied silently with every patch of stone, every prepared arrow, every repaired tower. Despite the terror, life inside the city continued. Markets were quieter, yes, but bread still existed. Guards shifted as scheduled. People whispered prayers and sometimes arguments. Children still ran in safe alleys, unaware of the full horror outside, though perhaps sensing it instinctively. Life, in its stubborn, resilient way, insisted on existing even when danger pressed close. One of the most extraordinary things about this bombardment was that it forced creativity. Engineers and soldiers had to improvise constantly. Cracks had to be reinforced on the fly. Gaps had to be blocked. Every day demanded new solutions. History shows that pressure often breeds ingenuity, and nowhere was this clearer than on the walls of Constantinople during the bombard's relentless assault. Meanwhile, Mehmed observed, adjusted, planned. He understood the power of intimidation. One wall falls, and morale can crumble faster than stone. He didn't just fire to break the walls, he fired to shape the minds of the defenders. Fear, exhaustion, and awe all were weapons in his arsenal, alongside bronze and gunpowder. And yet, even with the massive cannon shaking foundations, Constantinople's walls did not fall. Not yet. The city was tired, yes, scared, yes, bruised, yes, but still standing, which makes sense. Centuries of experience have a funny way of teaching you endurance. Stone may crack, but history builds toughness into cities. Nightfall brought a temporary reprieve. Smoke cleared, dust settled. Soldiers on both sides nursed sore muscles, stiff backs, and strained eyes. Constant repairs were made. Soldiers whispered to each other, joked softly, and prepared for the next day. And in the quiet, the city seemed to breathe again, even if it was only a shallow breath. In a way, the bombard did more than damage walls. It defined the siege. It set the rhythm. It reminded everyone, defenders and attackers alike, that history was happening now, not yesterday, not tomorrow. The great cannon roared, the walls trembled, and humanity responded with resilience, ingenuity, and quiet determination. So the city endured. The cannon thundered. Dust fell. Stones cracked. And people, soldiers, citizens, emperor, carried on. History was no longer just a story. It was a living, breathing, shaking experience. And, as night fell over Constantinople, every defender knew one truth. The next day, the bombard would fire again, and they would meet it. Stones, arrows, and courage in hand. The sea. Calm/endless, indifferent. For centuries, Constantinople had relied on it as a shield, a highway, and sometimes a lifeline. But now, the water itself was about to become part of the story, not as a friend, but as a chessboard in Mehmed's clever, relentless plan. The Golden Horn, the narrow inlet along the northern side of the city, had a giant chain stretched across its entrance. A physical "do not enter" sin, if there ever was one. No ship could just sail in. For centuries, this had been a major reason the city survived. Attackers could approach, but they couldn't easily break through. But Mehmed II was not in the business of accepting obstacles. Obstacles, to him, were just another kind of challenge. And so, he came up with what can only be described as a brilliantly ridiculous idea: drag his ships over land. Hills, mud, dirt, paths, you name it. They were going to move boats, like rolling logs through the forest. It was insane, logistically nightmarish. Yet, somehow, historically, it worked. Imagine the scene. Hundreds of men, horses, and engineers straining, sweating, shouting, muttering prayers, and swearing at the occasional stuck wheel. Occasionally, he probably said something motivational, like, "Yes, this will work. Probably. I hope." And maybe he cursed softly, but in a dignified sultan-y way. The defenders of Constantinople could see some of it from the walls. Fires from the camp, movement of strange shapes along hills. But it's one thing to see ships moving on land. It's another to realize they're almost about to be inside your harbor. Inside the city, panic wasn't immediate. There wasn't time for it yet. Instead, soldiers and citizens observed, whispered, speculated. They sent messengers, debated options, checked maps, and tried to figure out what exactly Mehmed was doing. Some probably said, "He's crazy." Some said, "That actually might work." Human brains have always struggled with ideas that don't fit their previous experience, especially when cannon fire is involved. Meanwhile, the ships crept forward. Each one had to be perfectly balanced, guided carefully so it didn't tip, crack, or crush anyone unfortunate enough to be in the wrong spot. Engineers had to adjust constantly. Ropes were tied, wheels greased, horses urged forward, men shouted in chorus to move in unison. It's exhausting just to imagine it. But Mehmed had patience. A very, very long kind of patience. He had already proven that he could wait, plan, and execute over days and weeks. And to show that no barrier chain, wall, or centuries of tradition could stop him. From the walls of Constantinople, guards noticed the ships inching forward. Alarm bells rang. Messages were sent to Constantine. The 11th soldiers prepared. Archers readied arrows. Cannons inside the city were checked, loaded, aimed. This gamble was as psychological as it was physical. The defenders had confidence in the chain and the harbor, and suddenly, that confidence was challenged. Mehmed was showing them, plans that seem impossible might still happen, fear mixed with awe, surprise mixed with tension. A siege isn't just about stones and swords, it's about shaking minds, too. On the Ottoman side, the labor continued. Men shouted, horses trained, engineers barked orders. The ships moved slowly but steadily, guided inch by inch, toward the Golden Horn. Somewhere in all this, Mehmed must have smiled quietly. History is funny that way. You spend months preparing, dragging boats over hills like a medieval Rube Goldberg machine. Well, at least it will be a story worth telling. By nightfall, some ships had reached the water at the edge of the Golden Horn. Soldiers on the walls stared, mouths slightly open. Engineers and sailors were exhausted but exhilarated. The chain still blocked the entrance, yes, but the ships now floated on water where, hours before, they had been rolling through mud. A clever solution had turned into a tangible threat. Constantine Sablast, ever vigilant, moved along the walls. He studied the situation, calculated what could be done, issued orders. The city's defenders were stretched thin, but they were still determined. Any hope that a chain could protect them completely had evaporated. The game had changed. The Golden Horn, which had been a trusted ally for centuries, was now a stage for Mehmed's daring plan. And the psychological weight of this gamble was enormous. The defenders realized, no wall, no chain, no centuries of experience could make them completely safe. Mehmed's patience, creativity, and relentless planning had placed Constantinople on a new, dangerous edge. And so, as night fell, the city braced itself. Soldiers checked supplies, arrows were restrung, cannons were reloaded, and Constantine XI walked the walls, steady and unflinching. The citizens whispered prayers. Children slept lightly, cats prowled uncertain alleys, and across the land, Mehmed prepared for the final steps of his naval gamble. History doesn't always pause for anyone, and in the quiet darkness, the pieces were moving. The walls, the harbor, the chains, the soldiers, the ships all were about to collide in a test of ingenuity, courage, and sheer stubbornness. And somewhere in the night, if you listened closely enough, you could almost hear the city itself holding its breath. The morning broke over Constantinople like any other morning, but there was a tension in the air that made even the birds seem nervous. The city had grown used to cannon fire, the rumble of tents, the shuffle of soldiers, and the distant sound of Mehmed's camp. For weeks, the defenders had patched cracks, reinforced towers, and dodged cannonballs. They had endured psychological warfare, shortages, and constant pressure. And yet, the walls stood, thick, scarred, stubborn. But now, the Ottoman plan was reaching its crescendo. They were ready to breach. The cannons thundered again, shaking the foundations of the ancient city. But this time, the bombardment wasn't just about cracking stone. It was about timing, distraction, and precision. Mehmed had coordinated his men carefully. Soldiers attacked from multiple directions. Archers rained arrows from ladders. Engineers worked furiously to prepare battering rams. Every action was choreographed to wear the defenders down until the right moment. Inside the walls, Constantine XI moved tirelessly. He checked positions, encouraged archers, and quietly adjusted defenses. He didn't have many options. Every weak point had to be strengthened, every gap filled, every arrow counted. He had to be everywhere, but like all great leaders in impossible situations, he had learned to stretch himself across space with presence, not just physicality. The Ottoman soldiers advanced in waves. They pushed towers of ladders against the walls, prepared bridges for crossing moats. It was exhausting, chaotic, dangerous, and somehow they did it with patience. Every step was calculated, every moment was part of a bigger plan. From the walls, defenders shot arrows, poured boiling oil, and launched projectiles. Every breach attempt was met with human and mechanical resistance. The battle was as much about stamina as skill. Fatigue became a weapon itself. Men shouted to keep awake, to encourage each other, to remember why they fought. Humor occasionally surfaced, a whispered joke, a shared grim laugh. Because in such dire moments, small levity was a lifeline. The chain across the Golden Horn had held for decades. But now, thanks to Mehmedi's naval gamble, it no longer guaranteed safety. Ships waited to strike from the water while soldiers battered the walls. The city's defenders had to divide attention, resources, and courage across multiple fronts. Every decision mattered. Every mistake could be fatal. And then, the breach began. A section of the wall, under constant cannon fire, cracked deeply. Stones loosened. Dust filled the air. The ground shook. Defenders scrambled to reinforce, throwing themselves at the problem with desperate energy. But the cracks were too big to ignore. Mehmed signaled his men. The assault intensified. Arrows and cannonballs flew simultaneously. The clash of shields, swords, and stone created a thunderous symphony of chaos. Inside, Constantine XI remained calm, a steady presence amid the storm. He moved along the walls, guiding men, adjusting defenses, even taking up a sword when necessary. Leadership isn't always about grand speeches. Sometimes, it's about standing where others are afraid, showing that fear can be met with courage. And he did that every single moment. The defenders knew this could be their final test. Their tired eyes scanned the walls, anticipating attacks, calculating trajectories, holding back panic. Every stone reinforced, every plank set, every rope tied, was a fight against The Ottomans, on the other hand, pressed relentlessly. They used every tool, every tactic, every trick they had learned through careful preparation. Siege engines, ladders, and relentless waves of soldiers tested the walls. Engineers worked to undermine towers. Archers and soldiers tried to create openings. Mehmedi watched, waited for the perfect moment to push his advantage. The city's defenders were exhausted but unbroken. Human determination is a strange, remarkable force. It bends, stretches, tires, but it resists collapse as long as hope survives. Every man and woman who stood on those walls became part of the story. Their courage was a living, breathing wall that supported the stones themselves. By late afternoon, the first major breach appeared. Stones fell. Dust rose in clouds. Panic tried to creep into hearts, but it was met by a collective effort to hold fast. Soldiers formed chains, pushed back attackers, and reinforced what they could. The breach was terrifying, yes, but it was also a challenge. They met head-on. Inside the city, civilians helped where possible. They passed supplies, water, and food to defenders. They carried messages. They prayed. They did whatever they could to sustain life inside the walls. The human spirit, when pressed to its limits, often rises in unexpected ways. It is chaotic, noisy, and unpredictable. But it is powerful. Mehmed, observing from outside, remained patient. He knew the walls were cracking, both physically and psychologically. Every hour that passed, every effort expended by defenders, brought the moment closer when the city would be forced to yield. Patience, strategy, and pressure. His formula for conquest was working. And yet, the defenders refused to surrender. They held the breach as best they could. Every moment they survived was a victory, a delay, a statement that centuries of history could not be erased quietly. They fought not just for survival but for the story itself, a civilization's last stand, etched into the stones they protected. As night fell, the dust settled, fires burned along the walls, and soldiers checked their positions. The breach remained, looming, threatening, but not yet fully conquered. Constantinople had survived another day. The walls had not fallen completely, and the defenders, tired, battered, and bloody, knew they had pushed back history for at least a few more hours. This was the nature of sieges: long, exhausting, terrifying. A test of patience, ingenuity, and human endurance. The breach was a reminder that nothing lasts forever. Yet everything can be resisted, if only temporarily, through courage and determination. Constantine XI walked the walls at night, gazing at the damage, nodding quietly to his men, offering words of encouragement. The city was shaken but alive, and somewhere, in the distance, Mehmed prepared for the next wave. The battle for Constantinople was far from over, but the human spirit on the walls refused to bow, even as stones crumbled around them. For weeks, the city had endured cannon fire, the dragging of ships over land, probing attacks, and relentless pressure. But now, Mehmed II was ready to launch the final assault, the moment every defender had feared and every attacker had prepared for. Inside the city, Constantine XI walked the walls one last time before the sun fully rose. His face was calm, even serene, but beneath that calm was a mind working faster than any cannonball could fly. Orders were given, positions reinforced, soldiers and archers readied. Every man, every woman who could help, was counted, accounted for, and reminded that they were the city's final line. The defenders knew what was coming. The first wave of attackers climbed ladders, stormed gates, and pressed on walls where cracks had widened under cannon fire. The city's response was immediate. Boiling oil poured, stones hurled, arrows rained down. Chaos reigned, but it was controlled chaos. Discipline and desperation intertwined in a strange, almost beautiful way. Meanwhile, Mehmed coordinated everything from outside. His soldiers advanced from multiple directions. Engineers worked to undermine towers. Boats moved along the Golden Horn, ready to strike from unexpected angles. Every attack was synchronized, a deadly dance designed to overwhelm the city's defenses at the precise moment when fatigue, fear, and damage were peaking. From the walls, defenders saw the storm approaching like a dark cloud. They had trained, prayed, and patched. They had endured weeks of unrelenting pressure. The first ladders hit the walls. Soldiers scrambled up, shields clashed, swords met steel. Boiling oil splashed. Arrows flew. Cannons fired from both sides. On the Golden Horn, Mehmed's ships pressed forward. Soldiers lowered small boats, prepared to land troops, and aimed for gaps where the city's defenses were weakest. The defenders had to split attention, reinforcing walls while monitoring the water. It was a test, not just of strength but of strategy, perception, and endurance. The breach, weakened over weeks of bombardment, became the focal point. Ottoman soldiers poured through, attempting to widen it with ladders, battering rams, and sheer numbers. Inside, defenders fought with desperation. Every man and woman knew that if this breach failed, the city could fall. Every arrow, stone, and spear counted. The fighting was relentless. It was the kind of battle that makes minutes feel like hours, hours feel like days, and days feel like weeks. Exhaustion became another enemy to fight. Soldiers who had been awake for days pushed their limits, clinging to life, courage, and duty. The city itself seemed to respond, standing tall even as stones crumbled. Constantine XI moved among his men, a calm presence in the storm. He didn't just give orders. He inspired. Sometimes, leadership is not about strategy, but about showing others that you do not yield to fear. And the defenders, seeing their emperor among them, found strength they didn't know they had. Mehmed's strategy was working. The walls were breached. Ladders gave attackers access. Engineers had undermined weak points, but the defenders resisted. They fought in groups, forming lines, blocking passage, even throwing themselves at soldiers when necessary. Desperation fuels heroism in ways that planning never can. And then, amid the chaos, the human drama unfolded. Soldiers shouted for comrades. Families huddled behind walls, praying. Citizens handed weapons, water, and encouragement. Every action mattered. The fight was no longer just about stone and cannon. It was about willpower, courage, and the sheer stubbornness of human beings facing the impossible. Despite all the preparation, ingenuity, and patience, Mehmed had not counted on the full depth of human courage. Each step forward was met with resistance. Each breach challenged with determination. The battle was a living story, written not by historians, but by people in real time, with sweat, blood, and fear. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, beating down on exhausted soldiers, defenders, and attackers alike. Dust hung in the air like a shroud. Cries of triumph, pain, and exhaustion mingled. Every second that passed was a small victory for the defenders. Yet, despite all resistance, the weight of numbers, strategy, and artillery was relentless. Mehmed pushed, coordinated, and pressed, exploiting every weakness, testing every line. The city's defenders, exhausted beyond imagination, realized that survival would require more than skill. It would require miracle, timing, and luck. By evening, the first Ottoman soldiers had entered certain sections of the city, but they had not yet conquered the heart of Constantinople. Fighting continued street by street, tower by tower. The defenders, though fewer in number and exhausted, continued to resist with everything they had left. Every block, every tower, every wall became a battleground. Night fell over the city, and for a brief moment, the fighting paused. Both sides tended to wounds, repositioned forces, and caught what little rest they could. Dust and smoke hung over the city, mingling with the scent of sweat, stone, and blood. Constantinople, battered and weary, still stood, but the final assault had shown that its walls could no longer guarantee safety. He knew the final moments of history were approaching, and whatever happened, the courage of the city would echo beyond the battle. And somewhere beyond the walls, Mehmed II prepared for the next day, confident that his relentless planning and patience would soon claim what he had worked so long to achieve. By now, Constantinople was a city stretched to its limits. Walls battered, streets filled with smoke and dust. Defenders exhausted beyond imagination, the end was near. Yet in the midst of all this chaos, one figure remained calm, resolute, and quietly heroic: Emperor Constantine XI. He walked the walls, not like a man expecting victory, but like a man determined to meet history on his own terms. He checked positions, gave orders, whispered encouragement, and occasionally offered a small joke to steady nerves. Soldiers, exhausted and bleeding, drew strength from his presence. Sometimes, the simplest thing, a calm voice in chaos, is worth more than a battalion. The final Ottoman assault was relentless. Cannons thundered, ladders were raised, and soldiers poured through breaches with terrifying determination. Smoke and fire filled the air. Every corner of the city seemed to scream simultaneously. Yet Constantine, sword in hand, refused to retreat. He knew the walls were failing, but he also knew that leadership is as much about courage as strategy. Inside the city, soldiers tried to hold back the tide. They blocked narrow streets, reinforced towers, and fought with the desperation of people who knew what it meant to lose everything. Boiling oil, arrows, and sheer determination slowed the invaders. Every second mattered. Every life mattered. And everywhere, the emperor's presence reminded them why they fought. Some historians imagine Constantine as quietly stoic, others as dramatic and heroic. The truth is likely somewhere in between. He was human. Tired, scared, worried, but unyielding. He understood that the moment had arrived when history would judge not just his strategy, but his courage, and perhaps his defiance in the face of inevitability. The streets became battlefields. Narrow alleys amplified chaos. The defenders were fewer in number but fiercely determined. Every gate was contested, every tower a last fortress. Constantine himself moved among them, sometimes fighting directly, sometimes giving orders, sometimes just appearing where courage was needed most. Mehmed too watched from outside the walls, confident but patient. He had prepared meticulously. He had anticipated nearly every move, calculated every attack, and moved the city's defenses like a chessboard. Yet even the best laid plans meet the unpredictability of human courage. And Constantinople, battered and exhausted, refused to bow quietly. Inside the walls, chaos and heroism intertwined. Soldiers who had never met before fought side by side. Archers passed weapons, citizens carried water, and everyone somehow found the strength to continue. Fear and exhaustion coexisted with bravery. Panic was kept at bay by sheer will, determination, and the presence of the emperor. Constantine's last stand wasn't about dramatic speeches. It was about action, presence, and choice. He refused to flee. He refused to surrender. He chose to stand, even knowing the odds were impossible. Leadership is often like this. It's less about grand gestures and more about simply refusing to step back when stepping forward is all that remains. The breaches widened. Soldiers poured through. Towers fell. The noise was deafening. Smoke and fire combined with the cries of the wounded and the shouts of commanders. Streets became rivers of chaos, but the defenders continued to resist, block by block. Each person on the walls and in the streets became a small story of courage, contributing to a larger epic of resistance. Constantine's movements were deliberate. He directed reinforcements, repositioned soldiers, and personally joined the fighting when necessary. Reports from both sides mention his courage, his refusal to retreat, and the sense that wherever he went, hope followed, even if hope was fragile and fleeting. Time blurred. Hours passed, though they felt like days. Exhaustion and adrenaline intertwined. Each breath was heavy, each step tiring, yet the emperor and his defenders continued, not because victory seemed likely, but because to surrender was unthinkable. Human beings, when cornered and pressed to their limits, often fight not because they can win, but because they must not give up. In the end, as the walls gave way in multiple locations, Constantine XI remained on the front lines. Accounts suggest he fought fiercely, rallying men, countering attackers, and refusing to abandon the city. And then, like the storybook moment it became, he was lost to history. He vanished amidst the chaos, defending his people to the last. Whether he fell in battle or met his fate quietly, no one knows for certain. The city's final moments claimed him, as if history itself had chosen to write his last chapter in mystery. For the people of Constantinople, the loss was immediate and devastating. Walls breached, streets overrun, and invaders flooding the city. Yet even in the horror, stories of bravery, resilience, and leadership persisted. Soldiers, civilians, and citizens remembered the courage they had witnessed. Stories would speak of a last emperor who did not flee, who chose presence and courage in the face of impossible odds. Stories would speak of a last emperor who did not flee, who chose presence and courage in the face of impossible odds. The final stand of Constantine XI was not just a military action. It was symbolic, emotional, and moral. And the courage to be present, even at the very end. Even after Memda II had entered the city and declared victory, life didn't simply stop. Istanbul, as it would soon be called, had to learn to breathe under new rule. Markets reopened slowly, fires were extinguished, and survivors, though scarred by fear and loss, began the painstaking process of rebuilding their lives. Amid this recovery, stories of bravery, ingenuity, and resistance echoed louder than the clash of swords or the roar of cannons. These stories became the real treasure of the city, more enduring than any wall or tower. One of the most important legacies of the fall was the human spirit itself. Constantine Sibylas, the last Byzantine emperor, became more than a man. He became a symbol of courage, defiance, and dignity in the face of overwhelming odds. His personal bravery, fighting to the very end, inspired not just those who saw it firsthand, but generations who would later hear about it. Legends grew around him. Some said he died heroically on the walls, others whispered he disappeared into the chaos, his fate a mystery. This uncertainty only added to his enduring myth, making him a figure who could belong to anyone who values courage. But the city's people also had their stories. Soldiers who had held wars long past exhaustion, women who carried water to the wounded, children who hid while observing the chaos. Every individual contributed to the tapestry of resistance. Even in moments of terror, small acts of kindness and bravery shone through. A baker might have offered bread to a weary guard. A mother whispered prayers to protect her children. A soldier laughed softly to steady his companions, shaking hands. These human moments, tiny and fragile, became part of the legend of Constantinople. They reminded the world that history is not only shaped by kings and empires, but by ordinary people doing extraordinary things under unimaginable pressure. From a military perspective, the siege of Constantinople marked a turning point in warfare. The Ottomans demonstrated the power of engineering, strategy, and new technology. Massive cannons had shattered walls that centuries of stone and mortar had never succumbed to. The ingenuity of dragging ships over hills into the Golden Horn, an idea so audacious it seemed impossible, changed naval strategy forever. Yet, even with all these innovations, the defenders' courage made the victory hard-won. Success required not just strategy, but the ability to endure human unpredictability, exhaustion, and willpower. It was a lesson for future empires. Technology may break walls, but only people can make a city truly resilient. The fall also changed the cultural and political landscape of the region. Trade routes shifted, alliances were tested, and the balance of power in Europe and the Middle East was irrevocably altered. Constantinople had been a bridge between East and West. Its fall marked the end of one era and the beginning of another. But, while the Ottoman Empire would rise in power, the Byzantine Empire would live on in stories, art, and memory, influencing generations long after its last emperor had disappeared. And yet, history is not just about power and conquest, it is about lessons for today. The story of Constantinople reminds us that courage, resilience, and human ingenuity are timeless. That even in the darkest hours, people can act with honor, creativity, and solidarity. That leadership is not just about strategy, but about presence, example, and the ability to inspire others when everything seems lost. And it reminds us that every action, no matter how small, ripples through time, creating echoes that history remembers. In modern Istanbul, you can walk the streets and almost hear those echoes. The city thrives, blending ancient stone with bustling life, mosques with markets, history with daily routine. Tourists wander through Hagia Sophia, marveling at mosaics and architecture, unaware that beneath every stone lies a story of siege, courage, and human determination. The ghosts of history linger, whispering tales to those who listen closely. Stories of bravery, sacrifice, and resilience that no conqueror could ever erase. And if you close your eyes, perhaps you can imagine the last moments on the walls. Constantine XI, standing tall, soldiers fighting desperately, citizens running to help, cannonballs shaking the ground and the air thick with smoke, dust, and human courage. It was chaos, yes, but it was alive, raw, and profoundly human. That is the essence of Constantinople, a city of walls, but more importantly, a city of people who refuse to surrender quietly. So, as we drift into the quiet of our own bedtime stories, we can take comfort and inspiration from Constantinople. Its fall teaches us that history is not only about victories and defeats, but about human spirit, that courage and resilience matter, sometimes more than walls or weapons. that even when empires fall and cities change hands, the stories of people of bravery, ingenuity, and defiance live on, and that, perhaps, is the most enduring legacy of all. The reminder that history remembers hearts as much as it remembers stone. History has a funny way of teaching lessons quietly, without shouting. And sometimes, the most important lessons aren't found in dates, battles, or kings, but in the choices people make when everything seems impossible. Constantinople is a perfect example of this. The city fell, yes, but it left behind a treasure far greater than gold or territory. Wisdom about courage, resilience, and human spirit. Let's start with courage. Real courage isn't always flashy or loud. Sometimes it's small, stubborn, and almost invisible. Constantine XI's bravery is legendary, yes, but so were the actions of ordinary people inside the walls. The baker who ran messages across dangerous streets. The mother who hid her children under rubble, while arrows flew overhead. The soldiers who, exhausted and starving, held positions that seemed hopeless. Each of these acts mattered. They remind us that courage isn't just for heroes in history books. It's in the choices we make every day when fear knocks on our doors. Then there's resilience. Constantinople's walls had stood for centuries, but walls alone cannot save a city. People do, and the defenders showed an extraordinary ability to endure. They were tired, scared, and faced with overwhelming odds, yet they adapted, improvised, and persisted. In life, resilience often works the same way. It's not about never falling, but about standing again, even when it hurts, even when the odds are stacked against you. Another lesson comes from leadership. Constantine XI might not have been able to save his empire, but he demonstrated the kind of leadership that history remembers. He led by presence, not just orders. He inspired through action, by standing where others feared to go, by making small decisions that carried immense weight. Leadership is often misunderstood as giving speeches or holding power. It's really about how we influence, support, and uplift those around us when stakes are highest. But let's not forget ingenuity. Mehmed II's siege teaches us that creativity matters, even in war. Dragging ships over hills. It sounds crazy, and it was. Yet it worked. The Ottomans combined engineering, patience, and strategy to achieve something that seemed impossible. In modern life, ingenuity is often about thinking differently, finding new paths, and not being limited by the rules we think exist. Sometimes, the boldest ideas come from taking risks that others wouldn't dare to imagine. There's also the lesson of perspective. History shows us that victory and defeat are never absolute. Mehmed conquered the city, yes, but he also inherited the courage, culture, and legacy of its people. The defenders' bravery outlived their walls. Stories of resistance traveled through generations. Sometimes, the moral victory lasts longer than the material one. It's a reminder that how we respond to challenges matters more than the immediate outcome. And then there's time itself. Constantinople teaches us to see history as more than a series of events. It's about human stories, emotion, decision-making, and consequences. A wall falling isn't just a wall falling, it's families displaced, lives changed, cultures transformed. Thinking about time this way makes history more human and more relevant, even centuries later. The city's transformation into Istanbul also carries a lesson. Change is inevitable. Empires rise and fall, walls crumble. People adapt. Life moves forward, yet the echoes of the past remain, shaping culture, values, and identity. We can't stop change, but we can honor it, learn from it, and carry forward what's valuable. And finally, there's the simple truth that stories matter. The story of Constantinople, its fall, and the people who lived through it has survived centuries because humans love to remember courage, struggle, and triumph over adversity. Stories preserve memory, teach lessons, and inspire hope. In a way, the walls of Constantinople live on through the stories we tell today. So when we reflect on Constantinople, it's not just about a city that fell. It's about human spirit, courage under fire, resilience in the face of despair, leadership in impossible times, ingenuity to overcome obstacles, and the power of stories to echo through centuries. These lessons are timeless. They remind us that even when things seem hopeless, we have the power to act with courage, think creatively, and leave a legacy worth remembering. And maybe that's the final echo of Constantinople, that history is alive in the choices we make, the bravery we show, and the stories we pass on. The walls may crumble, empires may end, leaders may fall, but courage, resilience, and human spirit are eternal. So tonight, as you drift off to sleep, let yourself imagine standing on the walls of Constantinople. Feel the tension, the fear, the hope. Hear the clashing swords and the whispered prayers. And remember, even when the impossible comes knocking, bravery, determination, and heart can leave marks that last far longer than stone. When we think of Constantinople falling, it's easy to imagine only soldiers, cannon fire, and walls crumbling. But life inside the city was much more than battles and strategy. It was about people living, surviving, and sometimes even laughing in the middle of chaos. And it's these human stories that make the siege feel alive, like the city itself was breathing. Imagine waking up in a city under siege. Smoke fills the morning sky, the distant boom of cannons shakes the ground, and yet daily life doesn't stop. Merchants still peek out of shops, trying to sell bread, cheese, or simple trinkets. Children, bewildered but curious, watch soldiers prepare defenses. Families huddle in their homes, whispering prayers or comforting one another. Every moment is tense, yet life somehow continues. One story tells of a baker named Nikos. He had a small bakery near the walls, and for weeks he had baked bread by candlelight while cannon fire rattled the shutters. His flour bags became the fall of Constantinople, also teaches the lesson of perspective. Mehmed, the second one militarily. Yet he stepped into a city alive with stories, memory, and culture. Victories may be recorded in stone and scrolls, but true impact comes from the human stories that endure. Sometimes, the moral or cultural victory outlasts the material one. The defender's courage echoes through centuries, reminding us that history belongs to both conquerors and the conquered. And so, what does this mean for us today? Constantinople invites us to think about courage, resilience, and legacy in our own lives. It reminds us that when we face impossible odds, the way we respond, our determination, creativity, compassion, and courage matters more than the outcome. Walls can fail, plans can falter, but human spirit, when nurtured, endures. Every small act of bravery, kindness, or ingenuity leaves a mark that can last far longer than we realize. Even as Istanbul thrives today, blending cultures, religions, and centuries of history, the echoes of Constantinople espes remain. Tourists wander the Hagia Sophia, admiring mosaics and architecture, perhaps unaware of the stories of siege and courage that shaped them. Locals live among centuries-old walls, hearing whispers of bravery, resistance, and survival in the very streets they walk. History, in that sense, is alive. It's in the stones, the stories, and the spirit of the city. And as we close this chapter, perhaps the most profound reflection is that history is not only about empires and battles, but about people. Leaders may fall, cities may change hands, cannons may roar, and walls may crumble, but human courage, ingenuity, and spirit persist. The story of Constantinople reminds us to honor these qualities, to recognize them in ourselves and others, and to understand that, even in loss, there is meaning, and even in defeat, there is dignity. So, tonight, as you imagine the walls of Constantinople and the smoke of the final siege, remember the people behind the history. The emperor standing firm, the baker feeding soldiers, the children carrying messages, the monks offering prayers, the women repairing walls. Every one of them contributes to the heartbeat of a city, the rhythm of courage, and the story that refuses to be forgotten. The fall of Constantinople was the end of an era, yes, but it was also the beginning of countless stories that echo through time. Stories of courage, resilience, human creativity, faith, and hope. Stories that remind us that even when the impossible arrives, bravery matters, humanity matters, and our actions, big or small, can leave marks that last far beyond our own lives. And in that sense, perhaps the fall was not just a tragedy, it was a testament to the power of people to resist, endure, and leave a legacy that even centuries cannot erase. It is a story worth telling, worth remembering, and worth carrying with us as we navigate our own lives, battles, and challenges. So, as we drift into sleep, let the story of Constantinople linger. Let it remind us that courage, heart, and human spirit are the walls that never fall, and that even when empires end, the stories of those who lived, fought, and loved continue to shine, quietly, endlessly, through time.